Ladies and gentlemen, it is Sunday, which I think is a great time to catch up with all the events of the week and also tackle a hot topic that many of you have been coming to me with, which is raid progress. How is Castle Nathria deep into Mythic as those of you get further and further in there, and what to expect? But the hot topic this week has, of course, been the MDI. And basically, and let's be honest, the farce that has surrounded the MDI ongoing, and this has not been a stellar standout for Blizzard, with several, well, at least one major player announcing this will be the last time he does this because, frankly, he could make way more playing Path of Exile over a weekend than the MDI possibly offers. Blizzard's attempt to make the MDI an esport is ropey at best. It's not, even at its actual peak, the most viewable game in the world from an esports perspective. It's tricky to judge because these players are fantastic at what they're doing, and what they're doing is also extremely difficult, yet it comes across awkward to a lot of players. And it does with the YouTube signing contracts, so they can't stream on Twitch. That does present some problems in terms of viewer capabilities and Blizzard's own capabilities of improving information for the viewers. Let's face facts, World of Warcraft is not the most easy to view game. There's no simple red versus blue here. You need to have intricate knowledge of what each of these classes do, and they're struggling to get that right. But that wasn't the hot topic this time. In fact, the biggest problem was the amount of bugs that players encountered that Blizzard just couldn't seem to figure out, and in some cases just let it ride, even when bosses were immediately killing entire groups and not remaking the group. And of course, Mists of Turner Scythe being one of the prime candidates for what in the hell is going on. I can tell you that I talked to some MDI players, and they raised the topic of Mr. Turner Scythe quite a lot and quite a long time ago, to which Blizzard said they had a solution. And the solution being, of course, if you're not sure what we're talking about, is Mist of Turner Scythe contains a maze, and that maze is completely RNG, and depending on which way you go, you can get much longer routes and much shorter routes, and that obviously does not make sense in a competitive speed environment. So Blizzard said they had a solution. They were going to standardize it. It was going to be fine. Nobody should run into any issues. And of course they did. And their solutions did not work, causing countless remakes into people doing Mists of Turner Scythe until eventually they just kind of went, screw it, get it done. There was nothing they could do about it, which is kind of makes a mockery of their own tournament. And obviously from the player's perspective, just makes them think, what are we even doing here? Which really sucks. It's not exactly something that should happen. And I feel kind of bad for the amount of time and effort these players put in order to have that happen, especially with an issue they foresaw coming so long ago. Not only that, Blizzard tried to deal with the situation of comps and the classes that people were playing in the MDI, and they limited it to having they can't have multiples of the same spec in the same group or the same class. So you could no longer have what we saw last time, which was like Prot Warrior and then 3 Hunters, for example. That can't happen anymore. And the viewers, I should say, the viewers were extremely disheartened to see that, well, the players just went, okay, well, instead of us being able to choose 3 of the best class, which classes are number 1, 2, and 3 in terms of being the best, and we'll just go with that instead. Leading to everybody, again, playing exactly the same comps, which, again, from a viewing experience, is just not fun. People aren't seeing their class represented, which is what a lot of viewers are actually asking for, is they want to see their class, the class they understand. And this cycles back into what we just talked about, is it's not easy to view. And if it's not everybody, and even viewers, have a full working understanding of how every class works, they probably just know their own. And if their class isn't represented, what information are they pulling away from the MDI? And they're pulling away things like, well, Vengeance Demon Hunters are probably OP. Windwalkers are probably OP. Fire Mages are OP. And the fact that their Shaman or their Hunter or whatever is not getting some representation is telling them that their class is rubbish. And that's what we're seeing in terms of people re-rolling and doing all that kind of stuff, is they feed into this information. Where the Race to World First at least has a good balance of comps, as best it can be, the MDI is really the niche of the niche of the niche. If this spec is 1% better, literally all it takes is if it's 1% better, that's the spec they're going to take. They're not going to take a 1% flat deficit. Even if it's so minor and makes no difference at all to the average player's run, it really is irrelevant. And it's kind of sad to see that that's the information that gets pulled away, especially if you browse through the live watchers or the live viewing comments on YouTube as the MDI is going on. That's kind of the general message a lot of the average viewers are pulling away from this, is there must be a reason everybody's playing these exact same comps. They are clearly way, way better, even if that difference is only actually 1% or something along those lines. Doesn't matter. Those are the specs we're going to play. And I'll be super interested after this MDI tournament to see whether we see a surge in rerolls to Fire Mages, Windwalkers, and Unholy DKs as a result of the MDI. It could be very, very toxic in its nature, which is awkward. Again, coming back to the players themselves are doing tremendously amazing things. Yet the effect on the player base could be detrimental, and it's kind of curious to see where Blizzard will go with this. It already has a very low prize pool. The viewership isn't amazing. It's hard for me to say. I'll be honest with you guys. I can't watch the MDI. I can watch a couple of matches, and I'm kind of curious to see whether something interesting will happen. But for the most part, I'm going to wait till someone tells me that a group did something cool. So that experience did happen. It's like, hey, did you see that interesting necrotic wake pull that took place? That could be cool. That's what I hear about afterwards without having to sit through the MDI. And it does feel that way to me. And I don't know how you guys feel. It's like, I feel like I'm sitting through it rather than enjoying it. I obviously feel very differently, though, about the Race to World First. Although the Race to World First considers a vast majority of it is guilds wiping, I truly enjoy watching the progression increase. I love seeing the curve increase. I love seeing the adaptation and the growth and the adjustments in order to get through these challenges. We tend to not get that same experience through the MDI because it's very heavily pre-planned and practiced. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of this, or whether Blizzard's going to try and interfere a bit more in trying to determine which classes are allowed, and whether they'll have boycotts and things. I've seen some very curious suggestions which would be very detrimental to the players themselves of having these kind of things happen, expecting every MDI player to not only be well-versed and well-practiced on a specific class, but then saying that you also need to have that at the ready to play any number of classes because of some sort of blocking out system or some sort of veto card or whatever it is they might introduce just to try and get it more interesting and have more class representation, and still not being able to raise the prize pool on the side to make it worth it for those players to even learn that level of stuff. Ultimately, you run the risk of losing the players in trying to make it more entertaining. It's a difficult thing, so I'll be definitely curious to see what you guys think about the MDI. Moving on to raid progress. So, me and my guild and many, many, many other guilds are working away on the most frustrating boss. One of the most frustrating bosses I've ever dealt with, and that is the Stone Legion Generals. This is where the very top world players are. This is what we're dealing with, and it's not fun. So the Stone Legion Generals is a really curious case, and I'm going to be quite open here. And you might remember the round table I did with Limit and Echo, where we kind of blasted Roger Brown for being supportive of the Stone Legion Generals, to say the least. The issue here, of course, is that this boss is just not fun, and it's a cacophony of problems that have all led to this point. First of all, the boss isn't really finished, and this is from Blizzard's words in one of the interviews that they did, not with me, but during the Race to World First event itself. They did kind of admit that the Stone Legion Generals was undercooked. And what they mean by that is that they simply ran out of time in order to get this boss right. And as it's an end mythic boss, it was definitely put at the low priority, with Shadowlands being delayed and having a whole host of other problems to deal with as a bigger priority. The Stone Legion Generals got pushed to the back. And one problem Blizzard was trying to tackle is that every version of the Stone Legion Generals we tackled on the beta was unfortunately just way too easy, especially for the penultimate boss of the dungeon. It is considered, by the way, to be the most difficult boss in Castle Nathria, and it's extremely difficult even when it's working correctly. So Blizzard did up the ante and make it a much more difficult boss. So then come the bugs. So one, you've got this boss that hasn't really been tested, had to be rushed to finished, isn't really done properly. Then you add on top of that it's full of bugs and it's got problems that break it. We've had several very tedious and very frustrating moments with that boss where it simply doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Everything from its spawning ads that just fall through the floor and disappear, and that actually just completely screws up the rest of the fight. It's manageable, to that extent. It is manageable, but the chance of you wiping when that stuff happens is extremely high, and it's out of your hands. We've had the best moment, the most interesting moment was a very quick couple of wipes in Phase 1, which led to our players being very angry at each other for screwing up Phase 1 of a very long fight, and then having to go to the logs, and ultimately, after a lot of rage, and a lot of anger, figuring out that they did nothing wrong. And in fact, the boss just killed us all because it didn't do one of its mechanics correctly, and it did that back to back. It literally did it from pull 1 and pull 2. It did the same thing twice and just eradicated everybody in the raid, despite the fact we're doing everything correctly. That's extremely frustrating. So that's something else to contend with. And the third thing is, of course, the length. This is a 12-minute long fight. So you combine the fact that it's extremely difficult, and then you can have bugs happen sort of 8 minutes into a very intense fight where you're very fully focused. It makes it into an absolute mess, and it's not been fun at all. However, we should be killing it hopefully this evening, or at least when you hear this, it might already be dead. And moving on to the easier boss, which is Nathrius, which is kind of hilarious that is the situation, but it is the situation that we're dealing with. Overall, Nathria has been an okay tier. The bosses I was really worried about, like Sludgefist, actually turned out to be kind of fun for me. I know Melee has a horrible, horrible time there. But as a ranged DPS and a hunter who has a multitude of jobs and nearly every other fight in there, and can get quite stressful on fights where the melee at least don't do much of anything. I find that one of my more fun bosses to do on a week-by-week basis. And overall, I'm fine with it. I just wish the Stone Legion Generals didn't end up in this situation. It's one of those fights that you just get bored with halfway through it, and then you have to kind of snap yourself back in and say, nope, we're still not done. There's still another 6 or 7 minutes of this fight to go. Double Bloodlust, and remember to do multiple potions and all those kinds of things to get through it. But I really hope Blizzard has more time in the next tier to not have a boss like this that is not only extremely long, extremely difficult, which I'm fine with the difficulty, but also loaded with bugs. And if we only get minor bugs on some pulls, that we consider that a win. And that's a bad situation to be in, where it's like, oh, okay, this bug is happening right now. We can deal with this bug. To have that happen is fine. But I will say I consider it kind of ridiculous that we're this long into the tier and we still have these kinds of bugs. That's not fun at all. But there's the summary. Hopefully next week I'll have a better story for you on those things. But remember, as we're having RPG February over on the stream, because of obviously a big emphasis on RPGs and putting the RPG back, we're having RPG February where we're going to be playing all the RPGs through time. We're going to be starting off with Chrono Trigger from all the way back when, and we'll be finishing up with Cyberpunk, the latest RPG to really hit the market, the more modern style to go along with that, along with some nuggets in between to represent the timeline and growth of RPGs. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much for listening, guys. I hope you had a great weekend, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.